This video is part 3 in a series talking about each mode, how I approach them when writing, and composing an example in each of them, as well as describing one or two other compositional techniques I used in these pieces. Links to the other videos in the series will be in the description, pinned in the comments, and in a card in the top right of this video. Now let's get on with it. The Songwriter's Guide for Writing in a Mode, Part 3. Mixolydian and Melodic Basslines. When approaching my Mixolydian example, I decided I wanted to lean into the mode's feeling of movement due to its flattened seventh. I felt a style that would work with this feeling was disco due to its propelling rhythms and movements, utilising guitars, drums, bass and keyboard. Like I did in the Aeolian example, I decided to use seventh chords in this piece, utilising the functional role that dominant sevenths have in music. Dominant seventh chords are a little bit different to major and minor sevenths, as they sound less at rest due to containing a tritone. An interval in music considered dissonant and unresolved. Alongside this, dominant chords are made almost completely out of notes one interval away from notes of the root chord in the standard major scale, including the leading tone, the note a semitone below the root. This results in very strong resolutions when going from the dominant to the root and creates what is called a perfect cadence. While this is often a very useful cadence, I've decided to avoid it in this piece to keep the sense of movement, as this cadence is often very final. Another technique I've used in this piece is playing a melody with your bass line. While this may not sound like a technique in of itself, we play melodies on instruments all the time, there are some unique hurdles we have to consider with bass melodies. When playing a melody on the bass, it's important to be aware of the chords that are playing over the top of your bass line. As the bass line in the song is usually considered the root note of the chord it is under, you will often want the longer notes, or notes that fall at the beginning of the bar, to be the root of the chord. Or at least a note of the chord, to avoid making the chord sequence muddy and uncertain. Notes that are not in the chord will often be used as passing notes, being sat on for short periods of time to avoid dissonance. This is the final piece. Aeolian and Sequences. Our penultimate mode is Aeolian. Like Ionian before it, Aeolian is the same as the natural minor scale, and so these techniques will also work in that context. Of all the scales and modes, Aeolian or minor is probably the most flexible, so there are far too many ways to approach it to mention in one video. If you're struggling in this scale, my advice would be to have a go at playing around in the pentatonic, as the reduction of notes can often force you to be more creative, even if you don't stay in it past that point. Due to Aeolian's long-standing association with rock music, I've decided to write a hard rock song, with drums, guitar and bass. The main technique I've focused on when writing this example is called sequencing. A sequence is a melody or riff that's played in one position, and is then moved to different positions in the scale to help develop the idea or underline the chords of the piece. This new version of the melody will follow the notes of the scale rather than the distances between the original. Providing unique takes on the melody each time. I decided to play a sequence on the bass to help drive the song forward. This is what it sounded like. Locrian and Implying the fifth. Our final mode is Locrian, a scale that often poses a challenge to songwriters, and it's not hard to see why. Locrian starts on a diminished chord, and therefore is hard to make sound pleasant to listeners without some work. Often musicians will reserve using Locrian for writing deliberately dissonant or unsettling music, but for this piece I wanted to try and make something more palatable, while still highlighting the elements that make Locrian Locrian. Due to the likelihood of some more dissonant intervals in this piece, I decided to go for a style where this is more tolerated and wrote a more desert rock, grunge sounding piece with guitars, drums and bass. My main focus when writing this piece was to avoid playing the root or flattened fifth at the same time, as this is the main source of Locrian's dissonance. This, however, proves to be a challenge due to the diminished fifth being present in the root chord of the scale. The way I got around this was by implying the fifth. Most standard triad chords are made out of a root, a third, and a fifth. While the fifth does help to create a more complete sounding chord, it isn't necessarily required in all situations, due to it neither providing the root of the chord or information on whether that chord is major or minor. It is for this reason that we can remove the fifth from the chords in this piece, avoiding this source of dissonance altogether, a dissonance which would have only been accentuated by the distortion on the guitars, while still including the fifth in the main riff of the track to keep the Locrian sound. Selectively removing notes from your chords when they're unnecessary is sometimes referred to as playing shell chords and can be helpful in many different situations and styles. For the final time in this series, let's hear how it turns out. Thanks for giving this video a watch. Links to the other videos in the series will be in the description, pinned in the comments, and in a card in the top right of the video. If you have any comments on this video or suggestions for future videos, let me know and I'll be sure to consider them.